I just faced my worst nightmare. Our HOA sent 3 inspectors to my ranch at 2 a.m. and kicked in my door while my wife slept. And their reason? They said it was just a compliance check. Funny thing is, the only thing compliant that night was my restraint not to use my crowbar on them. Let me start from the beginning. The tow truck was the first shot fired in a war I didn't even know I was fighting. It was a Saturday. The sky was a perfect, peaceful blue. I was in the garage, polishing the chrome on my 1969 Mustang. It wasn't just a car, it was a piece of history, a project my dad and I had started before he passed. Clara, my wife, was inside humming, probably baking something that would make the whole house smell like heaven. Life was quiet. Our single-story ranch house sat on 2 cleared acres abutting the cookie-cutter subdivision, an old sliver of farmland that refused to sell out. After 20 years in the Rangers, quiet was all I'd ever wanted. That's when I heard the low growl of a diesel engine and the hiss of air brakes. I wiped my hands on a rag and stepped out of our makeshift garage. I had on a fitted redwork shirt, sleeves rolled, the fabric tied across my shoulders. A big, greasy tow truck was backing up to my driveway, its yellow lights flashing like a warning. I'm a big guy, 6 feet 3 inches, 250 pounds. I don't go looking for trouble, but trouble sometimes has a way of finding me anyway. The driver, a guy with a neck thicker than my thigh and a stained t-shirt, hopped out. He didn't look at me. He just started fiddling with the controls for the lift. I walked over, keeping my hands loose at my sides. "Can I help you?" I asked. My voice was calm. It always is. He grunted and pointed a thumb at my Mustang. "Got a call to pick this up. HOA violation." He spat the words out like they were poison. He held up a piece of paper. I didn't need to read it. I knew who was behind it. Cynthia Vance, the president of our homeowners association. A woman who seemed to get her daily dose of joy from making other people miserable. "Violation," I said, raising an eyebrow. "It's in my driveway. On my property. What's the violation?" "New rule." The driver mumbled, not making eye contact. Article 7, Section C, Paragraph 4. No vehicle older than 10 years can be parked in public view. It's an eyesore. Public view? In my own driveway? I almost laughed. It was absurd. It was also a direct attack. My Mustang was my pride and joy. Clara knew it. The whole neighborhood knew it. And Cynthia Vance definitely knew it. This wasn't about a rule. This was about power. It was her showing me and everyone else in our little corner of suburbia who was in charge. I looked at the driver. He was just a tool, a wrench in her toolbox. Getting angry at him would be a waste of energy. "Listen," I said, my voice still even. "There's been a mistake. You're not taking my car." He finally looked at me then. He tried to puff out his chest. "I got my orders. The car goes. You can take it up with the HOA." He reached for the chains. That was his mistake. I moved faster than he expected. I didn't touch him. I didn't have to. I just stepped between him and the car. I planted my feet. I crossed my arms. I looked him dead in the eye. I didn't say a word. I just stood there. A mountain. A wall. He hesitated. His tough guy act started to crumble. He looked from my face to my car and back to my face. He saw something in my eyes he didn't like. He'd seen guys who blustered and shouted before. I wasn't doing that. I was doing something worse. I was being perfectly, dangerously still. He swallowed hard. The sweat on his forehead wasn't from the sun. "Look, man," he stammered. "I don't want no trouble." "Then you should get back in your truck and leave," I said softly. His radio crackled. A sharp female voice cut through the air. "What's the delay? Is the vehicle secured?" It was her, Cynthia. She was probably watching from her window across the street, a smug little smile on her face. The driver fumbled for his radio. There's a problem, ma'am. The owner is uncooperative." Uncooperative. Her voice was like ice. "Tell him the county sheriff is 15 minutes out. He can explain his uncooperative attitude to them." This was her game. She was smart. She was using the system. She knew I couldn't fight the sheriff. I took a deep breath. Clara came out the front door, a plate of warm cookies in her hands and a worried look on her face. "Leo, what's going on?" I gave her a small smile. "Just a little neighborhood dispute. Honey, why don't you go back inside?" She hesitated, her eyes flicking from me to the tow truck. She trusted me. She nodded and went back in, but I knew she'd be watching from the window. The thought of her being worried made something cold and hard settle in my stomach. The driver was looking at me, waiting. He expected me to back down. Cynthia expected me to back down. But they didn't know me. They didn't know what I was capable of. I wasn't going to let this woman bully me. I wasn't going to let her disrupt the peace I had worked so hard to find. I pulled out my phone. I didn't call the police. I didn't call a lawyer. I made one call to an old friend, a guy who owes me a favor, a guy who happens to be the county commissioner. I spoke for less than a minute. I explained the situation calmly and clearly. I mentioned the new, ridiculous bylaw. I mentioned Cynthia Vance's name. I hung up. I looked at the tow truck driver. Wait 5 minutes, I said. Then your boss is going to get a call. And that call is going to be a lot more unpleasant for him than this conversation is for you. The driver looked confused. His faith in Cynthia's authority was being shaken. We stood there in silence. The only sound was the hum of his truck's engine. 2 minutes passed. Then 3. His radio crackled to life again. This time it wasn't Cynthia. It was a man's voice, panicked and angry. What are you doing? Get out of there. Abort. Abort now. Do you have any idea who you're messing with? The driver's eyes went wide. He stared at me, a new kind of fear dawning on his face. He didn't say a word. He scrambled back into his truck, threw it in gear, and crept backward down the gravel, tires skittering, the whole rig practically crawling away. I stood there until the sound of his engine faded. The battle was over for now, but I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that this was just the beginning. This wasn't about a car. This was a message, and I had just sent one right back to her. I had won the first skirmish, but in doing so, I had just shown the enemy my strength. And an intelligent enemy like Cynthia Vance would use that information to plan her next attack, making sure it was one I wouldn't see coming. To understand why I didn't just pack up and leave, you have to understand what that house meant to me and Clara. It wasn't just wood and nails. It was a promise. I met Clara a year after I came home for good. I was a wreck. Not on the outside. On the outside, I was still the same guy who could run 10 miles with a pack on his back and handle any weapon you put in my hands. But on the inside, I was frayed, worn down to the wires. I'd spent 2 decades in places where the sand was the color of bone, and the only rule was to survive until sunrise. I'd seen things that stay with you, tucked away in the dark corners of your mind. I'd lost friends, good men. I came home with a chest full of medals and a head full of ghosts. Back then, I pulled graveyard security in an ER. One night, a tweaker stormed in, waving a broken bottle. Clara talked him down while I watched, stunned. That calm courage hooked me for life. We were married 6 months later. She was the one who healed me. Not with fancy therapy or medication, but with patience, with love. She gave me a reason to silence the ghosts. She made me want to build a life, not just survive one. We bought the house in this quiet, sleepy neighborhood because it felt safe. It had a big backyard for the dog we planned to get. It had a sturdy oak tree that was perfect for a swing. It was our sanctuary, our fortress of peace. We poured our savings and our sweat into that place. I built the deck with my own 2 hands. She planted a garden full of roses and lavender. Her spectacled husband, Walter, would wave shyly from their porch, a polite shadow, always one step behind her. Every nail, every flower, was a testament to the life we were building together, far away from the chaos I used to know. That's why I couldn't just run from Cynthia Vance. Running was what I used to do, running toward the fight. Now the fight had come to my front door. This house, this life with Clara, was the hill I was willing to die on. My days as a soldier were over, but I was still a protector. And Clara was my whole world. Our first year felt easy. Neighbors waved. Weekends smelled like smoke and sweet corn. We met Milo 2 doors down, a retired mailman with a Cold War imagination and a poodle named General MacArthur. He'd whispered that Mrs. Albright's petunias were listening devices and the neighborhood was a dead drop. I humored him. Harmless, loyal, every block needs a lookout. Then Cynthia Vance took the HOA like a hostile takeover. She and her husband Walter had moved in the year before, polite, quiet, but her eyes were always working. When Mr. Peterson, the old president, passed, Cynthia ran unopposed. Overnight, the vibe curdled. Recipes out, bylaws in. Friendly warnings turned to fines. Waves turned to reports. That's when the neighborhood stopped smiling and started watching. The friendly warnings about leaving your trash cans out too long turned into official violation notices with fines attached. The community newsletter, which used to have recipes and birth announcements, was suddenly filled with threatening reminders about bylaws no one had ever heard of. The vibe of the neighborhood started to change. People became wary. They started watching their neighbors, worried about getting reported. Cynthia was building a little kingdom, and she was ruling it with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove of HOA regulations. At first, her attention wasn't on us. She went after the Websters for having a basketball hoop that was 2 inches too high. She tried to force the Ortegas to repaint their house because the shade of beige they used was, in her words, insufficiently neutral. It was petty. It was controlling, but it hadn't touched us yet. Clara and I kept our heads down. We followed the rules. We just wanted to be left alone. We thought if we were perfect neighbors, she'd have no reason to come after us. But after the tow truck incident, I knew we were wrong. This wasn't about the rules. This was about me. I had challenged her authority, and I had won. A person like Cynthia Vance couldn't let that stand. I would be walking the dog, and I'd see her standing in her window, just staring at my house. There was no emotion on her face, just a cold, calculating stillness. It was the same look I'd seen on snipers right before they took a shot. She wasn't just a petty tyrant. She was a predator, and she had chosen her prey. The peace we had worked so hard to build was over. I just had to figure out why she had chosen us, and what her next move would be. The first wave of attacks was death by 1,000 paper cuts. It started with letters. Official HOA stationery, crisp and white. The first one was for the grass. 1 4-inch high, too high, $25. Hairline weed, $25. Windshield noise, $15. And finally, the welcome mat, which was another $25. It was a game, a stupid, childish game. But it was working. Not the fines. The money was nothing. It was the feeling. The feeling of being watched, of being constantly judged. We started to feel like prisoners in our own home. Clara would be in her garden, and she'd see Cynthia drive by slowly, her head turning to inspect every petal and leaf. I'd be washing my car, and I'd feel her eyes on me from her living room window. The peace was gone, replaced by a low, humming anxiety. Neighbor Milo tried to help in his own way. He knocked on my door one evening holding a strange-looking device with a spinning antenna. "It's an EMF meter, Leo," he whispered, pushing past me into the foyer. "I think she's using directed energy weapons on your petunias. They're looking a little droopy." I patted him on the shoulder. "Thanks, Milo. I'll keep that in mind." As crazy as he was loyal. And in the coming days, I was going to need all the loyalty I could get. The paper cuts weren't enough for Cynthia. She needed to draw more blood. She escalated. She started a campaign of whispers and lies. She told the Websters that I had bragged about getting their basketball hoop complaint dismissed, which was a bald-faced lie. She hinted to the Ortegas that Clara had called their new paint job tacky. Little seeds of discord planted all over the neighborhood. People we used to share beers with at barbecues started to avoid our eyes. They'd give us tight, forced smiles and hurry on their way. They were scared. Cynthia had made an example of us, and no one wanted to be next. I was a soldier. I was trained for this kind of psychological warfare. Isolate the target, turn their allies against them, weaken their resolve. It was straight out of the playbook. The problem was my home was now the battlefield, and my wife was in the line of fire. Clara was strong, but I could see the toll it was taking on her. The joy she used to get from her garden was fading. She'd come inside with dirt on her knees and tears in her eyes. She was watching me again, Leo, she'd say, the whole time, just staring. I was furious. A cold, quiet rage was building inside me. I wanted to march across the street, knock on her door, and end this. But I couldn't. What would I say? Stop looking at my wife. Stop being a horrible person? She was doing everything by the book. Her book. The HOA bylaws were her shield. She was untouchable. Any move I made against her would have to be precise. It would have to be final. The real inciting incident, the moment I knew I had to go to war, wasn't about a fine or a nasty rumor. It was the day I came home and found Clara sitting at the kitchen table, her face pale. In her hand was a letter, but this one wasn't from the HOA. It was from the State Board of Nursing. "What is it?" I asked, my heart starting to pound. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with disbelief. "It's a formal complaint," she whispered. "Someone reported me. They said I was stealing medication from the hospital, that I was treating patients while under the influence." The words hit me like a physical blow. Clara was the most honest, dedicated nurse I had ever known. Her entire life was about helping people. An accusation like this, even if it was baseless, could destroy her career, her reputation, everything she had worked for. Who? I asked, my voice dangerously low. Who would do this? Clara just shook her head, tears welling up. It's anonymous. A concerned citizen who claims to have overheard me talking about it. Anonymous. But I knew. I knew with absolute certainty. This had Cynthia Vance's fingerprints all over it. This was her masterpiece. She had targeted my car, my home, my reputation. Now she was going after my wife. She was trying to burn down my entire world. She had crossed a line that should never be crossed. She had made this personal in a way she would live to regret. I took the letter from Clara's shaking hand. I read the vicious, calculated lies. The rage inside me solidified. It turned from a hot, burning anger into something cold and sharp, like a shard of ice. This was no longer about a neighborhood dispute. This was about protecting my family. The soldier I had tried to leave behind in the dust of foreign lands began to wake up. He had a new mission. I looked at my wife, at the pain and fear in her eyes, and I made a silent vow. I was going to dismantle Cynthia Vance's life. I was going to find out her secrets, and I was going to use them to tear her down, piece by piece. The war had been declared a long time ago, but now I was finally going to fight back, and I wouldn't stop until I had won. She just had no idea what kind of man she had decided to target. The attack on Clara changed the equation. The game was no longer checkers. It was chess, and I was done playing defense. My first move was to protect my queen. The complaint against Clara was anonymous, but it was also weak. It was based on hearsay. The hospital she worked at loved her. They knew her character. I hired the best lawyer I could find, a sharp woman named Ms. Reed. I told her the whole story. The HOA, Cynthia Vance, the escalating harassment. She listened patiently, her face a mask of professional calm. The complaint to the nursing board is a classic harassment tactic, she explained. It's designed to inflict maximum stress with minimum evidence. We'll fight it, and we will win. But it will take time and money. She's trying to bleed you dry, emotionally and financially. I don't care what it takes, I said. Protect my wife. I'll handle the rest. And by the rest, I meant Cynthia Vance. The time for quiet endurance was over. It was time for reconnaissance. It was time to learn my enemy. I started a file, a real one, just like I used to do before a mission. Codenamed Operation Nightingale, after Clara's profession. Every evening after Clara went to sleep, I would sit at my desk and work. I started with public records, property deeds, tax assessments, voter registrations. I was methodical, patient. What I found was strange. Public records coughed up two tells, a cash purchase well above market, and quarterly transfers bleeding from the HOA's operating account into shadow payees. Dues funding hired muscle. On paper, Walter's inheritance looked clean. Too clean. There was a piece of the puzzle missing. A big one. I started watching her. Not like she watched us, with overt intimidation. I was subtle. I used the skills the army had taught me. I learned her routines. She left the house at 8:15 every morning in her pristine black sedan. She went to the grocery store on Mondays, the dry cleaner on Tuesdays. But on Wednesdays and Fridays, she would drive to a nondescript office park on the other side of town. She would go into a building that housed a dozen small, generic businesses, accountants, insurance agents, a dental lab. She would stay for exactly 1 hour and then leave. It was a pattern, and patterns were clues. Neighbor Milo, in his own bizarre way, became my most valuable asset. He was always watching. He saw everything. I just had to learn how to filter out the alien theories from the useful intelligence. One afternoon, he called me in a panic. Leo, you've got to see this. There's a black van. No markings. It's been parked down the street for an hour. The driver has a tattoo of a spider on his neck. He's definitely a government spook. I walked down the street. The van was there, just as he said. 3 bulky silhouettes, driver plus 2 riders, idled inside the cab. He wasn't a spook. He was a low-level thug. I knew the type. I'd seen them all over the world. This one was just wearing a polo shirt instead of combat fatigues. As I watched, Cynthia Vance came out of her house. She walked up to the van, spoke to the driver for a few minutes, and handed him a thick envelope. Then she walked back inside. The van drove away. Through the telephoto, I caught the driver's eyes in the glass. He raised his phone and snapped one back. Cold tradecraft slithered up my spine. This changed everything. This wasn't just about HOA rules anymore. She was hiring outside help. Men who looked like they broke legs for a living. The tension ratcheted up another 10 notches. The threat was no longer just legal or psychological. It was becoming physical. I installed a new security system in our house. Top of the line. Cameras, motion sensors, the works. I started checking the perimeter every night before I went to bed, just like I used to do on patrol. The old habits were coming back. The old mindset. The quiet suburban husband was fading away, and the ranger was taking his place. Clara saw the change in me. She saw the hardness in my eyes. One night, she found me in the garage cleaning my old service pistol. I wasn't planning on using it. Not yet. But cleaning it was a ritual. It calmed my nerves. It helped me think. She didn't say anything for a long time. She just stood there watching me with those wise, loving eyes. Finally, she said, "This is getting worse, isn't it?" I nodded, not looking up from the gun. "Yes." "What are you going to do?" she asked. "Whatever it takes," I replied. She came over and put her hand on my shoulder. "Be careful, Leo. Don't become the monster you're fighting." Her words hit home. That was the real danger. Not Cynthia, not her hired goons. The real danger was that this fight would chew me up and spit out the man I used to be, destroying the peace I had found with her. I looked at her, and the coldness in my chest melted, just for a second. "I won't," I promised. "I'm not fighting for revenge. I'm fighting for us." The lawyer called the next day. The nursing board had scheduled a formal hearing for Clara. It was going to happen. Cynthia's plan was moving forward. At the same time, I got a new letter from the HOA. It was a notice of a special assessment, a huge one. The community needed a new front gate, a new wall, and a 24/7 security patrol. The cost per household was astronomical. It was designed to hurt, to financially cripple us. And buried in the fine print was a new rule. If any homeowner was under investigation for a felony, which the baseless complaint against Clara could be twisted into, the HOA had the right to place a lien on their property immediately. It was a brilliant, vicious move. She was trying to take our home. She was trying to destroy Clara's career. And she was bringing in muscle to intimidate us. The net was tightening. She was escalating on all fronts, trying to overwhelm me. But she was making a critical mistake. She thought she was cornering a sheep. She had no idea she was cornering a wolf. She was forcing my hand, and she wasn't going to like the cards I was about to play. My investigation into Cynthia Vance had hit a wall. Public records were a dead end. Her routine was boringly consistent. The black van was a new element, but without a license plate, it was just a ghost. I needed more. I needed to get inside her operation. I needed to get inside her head. And to do that, I needed to get inside her house. It was a massive risk. If I got caught, everything would be over. Any legal high ground I had would be gone. Cynthia would win. But the threat was escalating too fast. The lien on our house, the hearing for Clara, these were endgame moves. I couldn't afford to play by the rules anymore. I started planning the operation with the same meticulous care I would have used for a mission in hostile territory. I studied the layout of her house from satellite images. I mapped out the sight lines from the neighbors' windows. I knew the exact model of her security system from the little sign on her lawn. I even knew the brand of her locks. Amateurs worry about the fight. Professionals worry about the logistics. My window of opportunity was her Wednesday trip to that mysterious office park. 1 hour. That's all I would have. It was tight. Too tight. I needed a way to extend it. That's where neighbor Milo came in. I went to his house armed with a fresh-baked apple pie from Clara and a very specific request. "Milo," I said, sitting in his cluttered living room, surrounded by maps covered in yarn and push pins. "I need your help. It's about Cynthia." His eyes lit up. "Is it the lizard people?" I knew it. "Are we finally going to expose them?" "Not exactly, Milo," I said gently. "I need you to create a diversion. A big one. Something that will keep Cynthia away from the neighborhood for an extra hour or two next Wednesday." Milo leaned forward, his face serious for once. "A diversion. A black operation. I can do that, Leo. I've been training General MacArthur for this very moment." Wednesday arrived. I was in position, hidden in a thicket of bushes that gave me a clear view of her house. I had a small bag with a few simple tools. Nothing that couldn't be explained away if I was stopped. I wore gloves. I left my phone at home. Tradecraft. At 8:15, her garage door opened. Her black sedan backed out. Just as she was about to drive off, my radio crackled. It was Milo. "The eagle is in the nest," he whispered dramatically. "Repeat, the poodle is in the petunias." I saw the little white dog, a pink-pawed agent of chaos, gleefully trampling Cynthia's flower bed. A moment later, Cynthia's car screeched to a halt. She got out. I saw her face. It was a mask of pure fury. She pulled out her phone. My plan was working. She was calling off her trip. She was coming back. But this is where the first twist happened. Something I didn't plan for. Her phone rang before she could make a call. I saw her answer it. Her body went rigid. The anger on her face was replaced by something else, fear. She listened for a moment, then spoke in a low, urgent tone. She got back in her car, but instead of turning around to deal with her ruined roses, she sped away, driving much faster than usual. She didn't go to the office park. She went in the opposite direction, toward the highway. My plan was in shambles. My window of opportunity was gone, but something bigger was happening. Something had scared Cynthia Vance. Something had overridden her obsession with her perfect garden. What could be more important than that? My instinct screamed at me that this was the real story. I abandoned my plan to enter her house. I got in my car and followed her. I kept my distance, staying 2 or 3 cars behind her. She was driving fast, erratically. This wasn't the calm, controlled woman I knew. This was someone running scared. She drove for nearly an hour, heading out of the city, deep into the rural county lands. She finally turned down a long, dusty road and pulled up to a place I never would have expected, a small, private long-term care facility, a nursing home. The sign out front read, Willow Creek Assisted Living. Why would she be here? Her record said she had no living family except for her husband. I parked down the road and watched. She hurried inside. I waited. 15 minutes later, a doctor came out and met her by her car. They spoke for a long time. Cynthia was agitated, gesturing wildly. The doctor looked grim. Finally, she got back in her car and drove away, looking more shaken than before. I had to know. I waited until she was gone. Then I walked into the facility. I approached the front desk, putting on my most charming, non-threatening smile. "Excuse me," I said to the nurse. "I think I'm in the wrong place. I'm looking for a friend of my mother's, a Cynthia Vance. I was told she was visiting someone here." The nurse, a kind-looking woman with tired eyes, gave me a sympathetic smile. "Oh, Mrs. Vance was just here. She's so devoted. But she's not visiting a friend. She's visiting her husband, Walter." My blood ran cold. Her husband? Walter? But I just saw him this morning at their house. The nurse looked confused. "Walter Vance? Oh no, dear. That's impossible. Mr. Vance has been a resident here for almost 5 years. He has advanced Alzheimer's. He doesn't recognize anyone, not even his poor wife." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. If Walter Vance was here in this facility, then who was the quiet, mousy man living in that house with Cynthia? Who was the man she had been pretending was her husband for the past 2 years? The entire foundation of my investigation crumbled. This wasn't just about an HOA dispute. This was something far stranger and more sinister. Cynthia Vance wasn't just a bully. She was living a double life built on a foundation of incredible, elaborate lies. And I had just stumbled right into the middle of it. The question was no longer just why she was targeting me. The question was now, who the hell was Cynthia Vance? The revelation that Walter Vance was wasting away in a nursing home sent a shock wave through my understanding of the situation. The man in her house was an imposter, a ghost. This wasn't just a vendetta. It was a conspiracy. My mission parameters had changed. I was no longer just defending my home. I was uncovering a crime. But what crime? Forgery? Fraud? It felt bigger than that. The presence of the man in the black van, the hired muscle, suggested something darker. I drove home in a daze, the pieces of the puzzle swirling in my mind, refusing to fit together. Clara was waiting for me. She could tell by the look on my face that something was wrong. I told her everything. About the nursing home, about the real Walter, about the man living in Cynthia's house. She listened, her brow furrowed in concentration. When I was done, she didn't panic. My wife, the nurse, the rock, she just got up and made 2 cups of tea. "So, she has a fake husband living with her," Clara said, sitting back down. "Why? To keep up appearances? To maintain control of her husband's assets?" "Maybe," I said. "His inheritance was the source of their wealth. Maybe he has to be legally present for her to have access to it. The man in the house is just an actor playing a part. And she's using that money to finance this war against us," Clara finished, her eyes hardening. "The lawyers, the hired thugs, the the fake complaints. We were at a crossroads, a moral crossroads. I now had information that could destroy Cynthia Vance. I could go to the police. I could expose her fraud, her fake husband, everything. It would be the logical, legal thing to do. It would end the harassment. It would clear Clara's name. But something held me back. A part of me, the old soldier, knew that if you strike at the king, you must not miss. If I went to the police and my evidence wasn't strong enough, if her high-priced lawyers could spin the story, she would come back at us with everything she had. She would be cornered, desperate, and even more dangerous. And there was another, darker path, the path of the Ranger. I could use this information not to expose her, but to control her. I could blackmail her. I could become the very thing I was fighting. I could use her secrets as a weapon to force her to back down, to leave us alone forever. The thought was tempting. It was a clean, efficient solution, an eye for an eye. But then I looked at Clara. I saw the quiet strength in her face, the unwavering moral compass in her eyes. And I remembered her words. Don't become the monster you're fighting. What do we do, Leo? She asked, her voice soft. She was asking for my plan, but she was also testing me. She was asking me what kind of man I was going to be. This was my moment of decision. The core of the entire conflict rested on this choice. How far was I willing to go to defend my own? Was I willing to cross that line, to sacrifice my own principles for the sake of security? I had done things I wasn't proud of. I had followed orders that felt wrong. I had seen good men corrupted by the power they wielded. I had come home, wanting to be better for Clara and myself. We're not going to be like her, I said, my voice firm. We're not going to use blackmail or intimidation. We're going to win this the right way. We're going to beat her in the light, not in the shadows. A look of relief washed over Clara's face. She reached across the table and took my hand. Good, she said simply. So what's the plan? The plan is to gather undeniable proof, I said, my mind starting to click into mission planning mode. We need to know who the man in her house is. We need to know about the money. We need to connect her to the thug she hired. We need a case so airtight that no lawyer can wriggle her out of it. We're going to build a cage for her, piece by piece. And then we're going to let the law snap it shut. It was a declaration, a commitment to a harder path, but the right one. The moral crossroads had been passed. My resolve was set. But I knew this meant putting ourselves at greater risk. To get the proof I needed, I would have to get closer to the fire. I would have to push her, to provoke a reaction. I needed her to make a mistake. My first move was to let her know that I knew, not with a confrontation, but with a subtle message. The next day, I sent a flower arrangement to the Willow Creek Assisted Living Facility. A beautiful bouquet of lilies. The card was simple. It read, to Walter Vance. Get well soon, from a concerned neighbor. It was a grenade with the pin pulled. I didn't know when it would go off, but I knew it would. I had just shown my hand. I had let the predator know that the prey was hunting it back. The response, I knew, would be swift and brutal. I was poking the hornet's nest with a stick. Clara and I prepared for the storm. We fortified our lives. She documented every interaction at work. I double-checked the security system. We told our lawyer everything. We were united, a team. We had chosen our path. We would face the consequences together. We spent that evening in a state of calm readiness. The anxiety was gone, replaced by a steely determination. The waiting was the hardest part. Every car that drove by, every shadow that moved, felt like a threat. The quiet of our peaceful neighborhood now felt like the silence before an ambush. I had made my move. Now it was her turn, and I had a sinking feeling her response wouldn't be another letter. It would be something far, far worse. The grenade I had tossed went off 2 days later. The response wasn't a letter or a lawsuit. It was a knock on the door at 2 o'clock in the morning. It wasn't a polite knock. It was the heavy, splintering sound of a battering ram. The house alarm shrieked to life, a piercing scream in the dead of night. Clara shot up in bed, her heart pounding. I was already moving. My feet hit the floor before the first crash had even finished echoing. The soldier in me took over. Sleep was a luxury. Readiness was a state of being. Stay here, I ordered Clara, my voice low and calm. Lock the bedroom door. Call 911. Tell them there's a home invasion in progress. She nodded, her face pale, but her hands steady as she reached for her phone. She was scared, but she was solid. She was a rock. I grabbed the heaviest thing I could find in the bedroom, a solid oak bedside lamp. It wasn't a weapon, but it would have to do. I didn't go for the gun in the safe. If the police showed up, a gun would complicate things. This had to be clean. I moved silently down the hallway. The front door shuttered again, the frame cracking. They were big, and they were determined. I didn't wait for them to come through. I went to them. I flicked on the hallway lights, deliberately destroying my own night vision, but creating a wall of blinding light for anyone coming in from the dark porch. The door burst open, splintering off its hinges. The first pair spilled into the foyer. A black widow tattoo on the bigger one's neck told me he was the van driver I'd clocked days earlier. They were big, dressed in black, balaclavas half off from the breech, faces visible in the glare. One of them had a crowbar. The other had a familiar tattoo of a spider on his neck. It was the man from the van. They were momentarily blinded by the light. That was all the time I needed. I didn't hesitate. I didn't think. I just acted. I launched myself forward, using the heavy lamp like a club. I swung it hard into the lead man's shoulder, right on the nerve cluster. He howled in pain and surprise, his arm going limp. The crowbar clattered to the floor. I didn't give him time to recover. I followed through with a driving knee to his solar plexus. The air rushed out of him in a whoosh, and he crumpled to the ground, gasping like a fish. One down. The second man, the spider-tattooed one, was more prepared. He shook off the glare and lunged at me. He was strong, but he was clumsy. He telegraphed his moves. He swung a wild haymaker. I ducked under it easily, stepping inside his guard. I wasn't a brawler. I was a technician. I drove the heel of my palm up under his nose. It's a nasty, disorienting strike. His eyes watered, and he staggered back, shaking his head. I didn't give him a moment's peace. I grabbed the front of his jacket, used his own momentum against him, and threw him headfirst into the wall. The drywall cracked with the impact. He slid to the floor in a heap, dazed and confused. It was over in less than 10 seconds. The adrenaline was pumping through me, hot and electric. My breathing was steady. My mind was clear. I stood over the two men, listening. I could hear a third one outside on the porch. "What's going on in there?" he shouted. "Vince. Rico." I didn't answer. I picked up the fallen crowbar. I felt the cold, heavy weight of it in my hand. I stepped back into the shadows of the living room, just out of sight of the doorway. "Come on in," I said, my voice a low growl. "The party's just getting started." He was cautious. He peeked his head around the broken door frame. I saw a flash of another ski mask. I stayed perfectly still. He took one step inside, then another. He saw his two buddies on the floor, groaning. He looked up, his eyes wide with fear, and he saw me. He tried to turn and run, but he was too late. I was on him in a flash. I didn't use the crowbar to hit him. I used it to hook his ankle, sweeping his feet out from under him. He went down hard, his head bouncing off the hardwood floor with a sickening thud. He was out cold. Spider Neck tried to crawl toward the porch light, dragging one dead leg before I flipped him and taped wrists to ankles. 3 down. Silence. The only sounds were the lingering shriek of the alarm and the distant wail of approaching sirens. Clara had done her job. I quickly checked the rest of the ground floor. Clear. I ran upstairs. Clara was on the phone with the 911 dispatcher, her voice steady and clear, providing details. She looked at me, saw I was unharmed, and a wave of relief washed over her face. "They're on their way," she said. "I know," I replied. I went back downstairs. The 3 thugs were beginning to stir. I grabbed a roll of duct tape from the kitchen drawer and efficiently hog-tied each of them, wrists and ankles. It was a practiced, methodical process. When the police arrived, they would find 3 neatly packaged criminals waiting for them on my floor. There would be no question of who was the victim and who were the aggressors. I shrugged into the red work shirt hanging on the hook, then stepped onto the porch with the crowbar resting along my shoulder. Porch lights blinked on up and down the street. Cynthia and a board member hustled to the curb. "How dare you fight back?" she shouted across the lawn. The police swarmed the scene. Lights painted the walls in flashing red and blue. They were professional and efficient. I gave them a calm, clear statement. Home invasion. I defended myself and my wife. The evidence was undeniable. The broken door, the 3 masked men, their tools. My lack of any serious injury spoke to my skill, but their presence in my house spoke to their guilt. As they were leading the men away in handcuffs, I made eye contact with the one with the spider tattoo. He was dazed, but he was conscious. I leaned in close so only he could hear me. "This was a mistake," I whispered. She sent you to the wrong house. You tell Cynthia Vance that her next message better be delivered by a lawyer, because the next time someone comes through my door uninvited, they won't be walking out." His eyes widened in fear and understanding. He knew I meant it. He knew who I was talking about. I had just sent my own message back to Cynthia, a loud and clear one. The board had been kicked over. The chess pieces were scattered. This was no longer a game of strategy. It had become a raw, primal fight for survival. And I had just proven without a shadow of a doubt that I was better at it than she was. The question was, what would a desperate, intelligent, and evil woman do when she realized she could no longer win by force? The aftermath of the home invasion was chaos. Our quiet street was flooded with police cars and news vans. Neighbors gathered on their lawns, whispering, their faces a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. Cynthia Vance's house was dark, not a single light on. But I knew she was watching. She was observing, learning. The police were impressed by how I'd handled the situation. 3 intruders, all neutralized, none of them seriously injured. "You've got some skills, Mr. Sullivan," the lead detective, a weary-looking man named Shaw, said to me. "Most people in your situation, it doesn't end this cleanly." "I got lucky," I said. It was a lie. Luck had nothing to do with it. They took the 3 thugs downtown for processing. I knew they wouldn't talk. Men like that have a code, or they're paid enough to keep their mouths shut. My link to Cynthia was still just a whisper, a gut feeling. I had no hard proof. But the attack gave me an opportunity. The lead investigator, Detective Shaw, wasn't the sleepy patrol cop I'd met after the tow truck stunt. He worked major crimes and had zero tolerance for HOA theatrics. He was smart. He knew this wasn't a random burglary. "These guys weren't here for your TV," he said. "This was personal. You have any enemies?" I looked him in the eye. "I have a neighbor," I said. "The HOA president. We haven't been seeing eye to eye." It was an understatement of epic proportions, but it was enough to plant a seed. I told him about the harassment, the letters, the tow truck. I didn't mention the fake husband or the nursing home. Not yet. That was my ace in the hole. I had to play it at the right time. Shaw made a note. He was intrigued. While the police wrapped up, my mind was racing. The attack was a failure, but it was also a message. Cynthia was done with subtlety. She was willing to use violence. But why? Why this insane, escalating vendetta? The fraud with her husband's money explained her methods, but not her motive. There was still a piece missing. A big one. The why of it all. That's when neighbor Milo showed up, pushing through the police tape with General MacArthur tucked under his arm. The dog was still faintly pink. Milo's eyes were wide. "Leo?" I heard the sirens. Was it the men in black? The Spider Syndicate? "Something like that, Milo," I said, managing a tired smile. "I knew it," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "She's not just a power-mad HOA president, Leo. She's something else. I've been doing some digging. Normally, I would have tuned him out, but this time I listened. Desperate times, desperate measures. What kind of digging, Milo?" "I was looking at old newspaper archives online," he said, pulling a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. "Looking for her name, Cynthia Vance. And I found something. Not from around here. From years ago, a different state." He handed me the paper. It was a printout of a small, grainy news article from a local paper in North Carolina, near Fort Bragg. The headline was simple: "Local soldier remembered as hero." I read the article. It was about a young Army private who had been killed in action in Afghanistan. A tragic story, one I had seen play out 100 times. I scanned the text, my eyes searching for a connection. And then I saw it. The name of the fallen soldier, Private Daniel Vance. And at the end of the article, a quote from his grieving mother. Her name was Cynthia. The world stopped. The sounds of the police radios, the whispering neighbors, it all faded away into a dull roar. Daniel Vance. The name echoed in my memory, unlocking a door I had kept bolted shut for over a decade. It wasn't just his mother's name I recognized. I recognized his. Farah Province, Afghanistan. A dusty, forgotten corner of the world. My unit was tasked with a high-risk extraction. An informant with critical intelligence was trapped in a village controlled by insurgents. It was a bad situation. The intelligence was rushed. The plan was flawed. My commanders wanted it done yesterday. I was the boots on the ground. I was the one who had to lead my men into the fire. Daniel Vance was in my squad. He was just a kid, 19 years old, full of fire and bravado. He was brave. Too brave. During the firefight, He broke cover, trying to lay down suppressing fire to protect another man who was pinned down. It was the right instinct, but the wrong move. He exposed himself for a second too long. A sniper's bullet found him. He died instantly. I was the one who wrote the letter to his mother. I told her he was a hero. I told her he died bravely, saving his comrades. I told her the things you're supposed to say, but I never told her the whole truth. I never told her that I questioned the mission from the start, that I believed it was a needless risk based on faulty intel. I never told her that a part of me felt responsible. I was his commanding officer. His life was in my hands, and I had brought him home in a box. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. The puzzle wasn't a puzzle at all. It was a portrait of a woman's grief, twisted and curdled into a cold, hard diamond of hate. She didn't move to our neighborhood by accident. She hunted me down. She learned my life, my weaknesses. She created this elaborate persona, the fake husband, the HOA presidency, all of it, for one purpose: revenge. She wasn't trying to take my house or my money. She was trying to take my peace. She was trying to dismantle my life with the same methodical precision that she believed I had used to dismantle hers. The HOA violations, the attack on Clara's career, the physical intimidation, it was all a form of psychological torture. She was recreating the chaos of the battlefield in my quiet suburban life. She was trying to make me feel the same loss, the same helplessness that she had felt when she received that letter from me all those years ago. The nursing home, the real Walter, it was all a smokescreen. The money wasn't the motive. It was the ammunition. It was the fuel for her war. A war that had started a decade ago in the dust of Afghanistan and was now reaching its bloody climax on my front lawn. I looked across the street at her dark house. I wasn't seeing a petty tyrant anymore. I was seeing a ghost. A mother whose heart had been ripped out and who had spent the last 10 years sharpening the broken pieces into a weapon aimed directly at me. This changed everything. I couldn't fight her with fists or lawyers. This wasn't a battle of strength or wits. This was a battle of pain. And to win it, I would have to confront the ghosts of my own past. The revelation hit me harder than any punch. My war with Cynthia Vance wasn't about bylaws or property lines. It was a ghost story, a story that started in the Afghan dust and had followed me home. I finally understood her strategy. It wasn't random cruelty. It was a carefully orchestrated symphony of pain. She was a master of psychological warfare, and her target was the quiet life I had built with Clara. Understanding her motive didn't make her less dangerous. It made her more so. A woman driven by grief is more powerful than any army. I couldn't fight her with force anymore. The home invasion proved that. I had won the physical battle, but it had only escalated the conflict. Going to the police with the story about her son would sound insane. Detective, the HOA president is harassing me because her son died under my command a decade ago. They'd think I was the one who was crazy. I had to end this. Not just for me and Clara, but for Cynthia, too. This hatred was consuming her, hollowing her out from the inside. There was only one battlefield left: the truth. The showdown had to be public. It had to be on her turf. The upcoming HOA annual meeting. It was her stage, her throne room. It was the perfect place to pull back the curtain. My plan was twofold. First, I needed leverage. The man pretending to be Walter Vance was my key. I spent a day doing some deep-level digital reconnaissance, using skills I hadn't touched in years. I ran facial recognition searches on the photos I had discreetly taken of the imposter. It took time, but I got a hit. His name was Ethan Doyle. He wasn't a relative. He was a disgraced actor with a string of minor fraud charges and a gambling problem. Cynthia hadn't just hired him. She owned him. She was likely paying his debts, keeping him on a very short leash. Second, I needed to control the narrative. The HOA meeting was open to all homeowners. It was usually a dull affair, with maybe a dozen people showing up. I needed everyone to be there. I spent the next 2 days going door to door. I didn't talk about Cynthia or her son. I talked about the special assessment, the massive, crippling fee she was trying to levy on all of us. I showed them the numbers. I explained how it would put liens on their homes. I stoked their fear and their anger. I told them, if you want to stop this, you have to show up to the meeting. We all have to be there. By the time the night of the meeting arrived, the community center was packed. It was standing room only. The Websters were there, the Ortegas, every family Cynthia had ever fined or intimidated. The air was thick with tension. Cynthia was at the front of the room, sitting at a long table with her puppet board members. She looked cool and composed, but I could see the tightness around her eyes. She hadn't expected this kind of turnout. The man, Ethan Doyle, sat beside her, looking like a nervous mouse. The meeting started with the usual boring procedures, reading of minutes, treasurer's report. Then Cynthia brought up the special assessment. She launched into a polished speech about security and property values. But the crowd was restless. People started shouting questions. How can we afford this? Why wasn't this put to a proper vote? This was my opening. I stood up. I have a question, I said, my voice cutting through the noise. The room went silent. All eyes turned to me. Cynthia stared at me, her face a mask of cold fury. Mr. Sullivan, she said, her voice dripping with venom. You are out of order. Am I said, walking slowly toward the front of the room. I think the people here deserve some answers. For example, they deserve to know about the men you hired to break into my house. I tossed a file folder onto the table. It contained the police report and mugshots of the three thugs. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Those are baseless accusations, she hissed. Are they? I replied. Let's ask your husband. I turned to the man sitting next to her. Ethan, isn't that your name? Ethan Doyle. Tell us, Ethan. Did Cynthia ask you to hire those men? Did she use your gambling debts to force you into it? Ethan's face went white. He looked at Cynthia, then at the angry faces in the crowd. He started to tremble. Cynthia grabbed his arm, her nails digging into his skin. Don't you dare say a word, she whispered fiercely. But it was too late. I had broken her control. I had revealed her fraud in front of the entire community. Her power was built on a carefully constructed illusion, and I had just shattered it. The crowd was on the verge of erupting. But this wasn't the end of my plan. This wasn't about destroying her with facts and figures. It was about reaching the woman underneath the monster. But that's not the real reason we're here, is it, Cynthia? I said, my voice softening. The anger was gone, replaced by a deep, world-weary sadness. This isn't about assessments or security. This is about Farah Province. This is about your son. This is about Private Daniel Vance. The name hung in the air like a ghost. Cynthia flinched as if I had physically struck her. The mask of rage fell away, and for the first time, I saw the raw, bottomless grief beneath it. The crowd was confused, murmuring. I was there, Cynthia, I said, speaking only to her now. I was a CO. I was the one who led that mission. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my wallet. From a worn sleeve, I took out a small, faded photograph. It was a picture of a young soldier with a goofy grin, his arms slung around my shoulders. It was Daniel. He was a good kid. He was brave. He shouldn't have died that day. The mission was a mistake, and I've lived with that every single day for the last 10 years. I walked up to the table and placed the photograph in front of her. He gave me this picture the day before the mission, I said softly. He told me to give it to his mom if he didn't make it. He said you'd like it because he was finally smiling with his teeth. I should have sent it with the letter. I'm sorry. I kept it. I kept it to remind me. Cynthia stared at the photograph of her smiling boy. Her whole body began to shake. A single tear rolled down her cheek, then another. The dam of hatred she had built around her heart for a decade finally broke. A gut-wrenching sob escaped her lips. It wasn't a sound of defeat. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated pain. The fight was over. Her war was lost, not because she was outmaneuvered, but because she was finally forced to confront the grief she had tried to weaponize. The entire room was silent, bearing witness to a mother's broken heart. Her power, built on fear and rules, had been undone by a simple act of truth and a forgotten photograph. The aftermath was quiet. The HOA meeting dissolved in a state of stunned silence. The neighbors filed out, looking at Cynthia, not with anger, but with a sad, uncomfortable pity. Her rage had been her armor, and without it, she was just a broken woman. The police, called by a board member during the chaos, arrived and took Ethan Doyle into custody for fraud. They questioned Cynthia, but it was clear this was no longer just a legal matter. The fight had gone out of her. A week later, a moving truck was parked in her driveway. Clara and I watched from our window as Cynthia, looking small and frail, carried boxes out of the house she had turned into a fortress. There was no victory in it, no satisfaction, just a profound sense of sorrow for all the pain that had been caused. Before she drove away for the last time, I walked across the street. She stood by her car, not looking at me. "I'm sorry for your loss, Cynthia," I said. It was all that needed to be said. She didn't answer. She just gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. She got in her car and drove away, leaving our quiet neighborhood behind for good. The HOA was reformed. The ridiculous rules were abolished. The special assessment was canceled. The community started to heal. The Websters put their basketball hoop back up. The Ortegas even added some colorful, non-neutral trim to their house. Neighbor Milo declared the Spider Syndicate defeated and promoted General MacArthur to a 5-star general. Life began to return to normal, but it was a new normal. We had been tested. We had been pushed to the brink. I had stared into the abyss of my past and faced the ghosts I had tried to outrun. The question had been how far a man will go to defend his own. I had found my answer, all the way. But I also learned that the defense isn't always about building higher walls or fighting with more force. Sometimes the truest defense is to meet anger with understanding and to fight hatred with a painful, compassionate truth. Clara and I had won our peace back, not by destroying our enemy, but by understanding her. And that was a victory that would truly last.